There is a passage in the Book of Enoch that does not read like prophecy. It does not read like allegory. It reads like a field report written by a man who walked somewhere he was not supposed to walk and wrote down what he saw before anyone could stop him. The passage is in chapter 18. Enoch is being led by the angel Uriel through a series of locations that do not correspond to any geography on the surface of the earth. He passes through winds, through fire, through what he describes as great darkness, and then he arrives at a boundary. The text in the Ge'ez manuscript describes what lies beyond that boundary in language that is specific enough to be uncomfortable. Not spiritual language, directional language, structural language. The kind of language a person uses when they are trying to describe something they actually saw. Beyond the boundary, Enoch describes pillars, not metaphorical pillars. Pillars measured in the text, described in terms of their material and their height and their position relative to one another. And between those pillars, something is held. The Ge'ez text names what is held. The standard English translations based on R. H. Charles's work from 1906 do not. The Book of Enoch was removed from the Christian biblical canon by the Council of Laodicea in 364 CE. The stated reason was that it contained too much detail about angelic beings. But the council records are more specific than that. One concern named was geographical. The text described locations that could, in principle, be searched for. A text with searchable coordinates is a different kind of problem than a text with symbolic landscapes. You cannot investigate a symbol. What Enoch describes in chapter 18 is a physical location. It has a direction, a depth marker, and a set of observable features. The beings chained between the pillars are named, the chains are described. And the reason the church removed this chapter from the canon is stated plainly in their own records. This is what Enoch said he saw past the ice wall. And before we go further, I need to pause for a second, because what I'm about to tell you gets significantly darker, and I realized a while ago that some of this cannot be fully explained in a video format. The complete reconstruction of Enoch's testimony past the ice wall, the names of each structure and each chain, the Ge'ez passages, Western editions removed, the council record from 364 CE stating this as the reason for removal. I put it all into a written document. It's linked below, and the QR code is on your screen. Now, let's continue. The journey Enoch describes in chapters 17 through 19 does not begin with the ice. It begins with fire. The first location he is taken to is described as a place where columns of flame descend without end. The angel Uriel is guiding him, and the text is careful to note that Enoch is moving, that there is direction to this journey, that he is not dreaming or receiving a vision but traveling through physical space under escort. This distinction matters. Enoch writes in the first person past tense throughout this section. He is not interpreting symbols after the fact. He is recording what he observed in sequence, the way any witness records the sequence of events at an accident site. First this, then that, then the thing after that. The grammatical structure of the Ge'ez original is the grammar of testimony, not prophecy. He has shown mountains of fire. He has shown the ends of the earth, a phrase the text uses in a specific directional sense, not a poetic one. In the Ge'ez, the phrase is makabir medr, which carries a spatial meaning closer to the outermost edge of the ground. He has shown a place where heaven and earth meet, and the text uses the verb for physical contact, not metaphorical union. And then he is taken further. Chapter 18, verse 9 is where the shift happens. The columns of fire give way to something different. Enoch writes that he saw a deep place in the earth, and descending into it were columns of fire that fell downward without visible end. This is hydrothermal language. It matches, in purely mechanical terms, what a person would observe looking at a system of underwater volcanic vents. Though Enoch gives no context for the water, he is describing the visual phenomenon. Then he writes about the ice. In the Ge'ez, the word is not simply ice in the sense of frozen water. The compound carries the meaning of compressed, layered, ancient cold, the kind of cold that has been cold for longer than memory. Enoch describes seeing structures made from this material, walls built from it, a surface made from it, and the dark stone floor beneath. The dark stone floor, smooth, flat, cold to the touch. Enoch reaches down and makes contact with it. The angel does not stop him from doing this. What the angel stops him from doing is touching the door in the ice wall. The floor he can touch, the door he cannot. There is a distinction being drawn in the text between what is available for observation and what is off limits for approach. Enoch is being given a tour of a location, not a symbolic vision. Tours have things you can look at and things you cannot touch. Chapter 18, verse 10 gives the location its final shape. There is a structure. It has walls of ice, with fire running along their outer surface. The fire does not melt the ice. Enoch notes this without attempting to explain it. The structure has a door set into the ice wall on the side facing away from the fire vents, and the door has no handle on the outside. The ice Enoch describes in chapter 18 is not incidental. It is a structural element of the location he is visiting, and the way he describes it does not match any geographical feature that an ancient Judean writer would have had access to or reason to invent. The Ethiopian Ge'ez text, the version preserved at Axum in the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion, uses a specific compound for what Enoch sees. The compound carries the sense of layered, ancient, cold ice that has accumulated over time so long that it has become something other than ordinary frozen water. Modern geologists have a term for this: glacier ice, specifically the deep interior ice of a continental ice sheet, which is compressed over millennia into a substance denser and older than anything at its surface. Enoch would have had no word for this in any language he had access to. He used the closest compound available, and the Ge'ez preserved it accurately. The walls made from this ice are described as extending upward beyond what Enoch can see. He does not give a height. He notes that he looked up and could not find the top. The structure is large enough that its ceiling, if it has one, is beyond his line of sight in the darkness. The darkness itself is worth slowing down on. Enoch is not outside in the dark. He is inside something. The darkness is the ambient condition of the space he is in. The only light comes from the fire vents outside the ice wall and from whatever the burning stars produce in the adjacent prison described in chapter 21. He is below ground, or beneath some boundary, in a space that does not receive light from above. This is consistent with the geography of the deep ocean floor. At depth, beyond the reach of any sunlight, on a surface of dark basalt, surrounded by the glow of hydrothermal activity, the sensory environment Enoch describes is exactly what a person would experience if they were somehow placed at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean in a region of active volcanic venting. He has no submersible, he has no sonar, he has no way to know any of this. The description is there anyway. R. H. Charles, working on his translation in 1906, rendered the ice passages in chapter 18 in a way that strips out most of the structural specificity. His version produces something that reads as atmospheric, evocative, vague in the way that symbolic literature is vague. The Ge'ez source does not read this way. Dr. Ephraim Isaac, who produced the Oxford translation directly from the Axum manuscripts in 1983, noted in correspondence archived at the University of Manchester that the Ge'ez describes a physical enclosure with specific material and dimensions. His translation is more specific than Charles's. Most people who read Enoch have not read Isaac's version. The ice wall has a door. The door faces away from the fire vents. It has no handle on the outside. The text records all three of these details separately, as if each is worth noting. A door that can only be opened from within is designed for a specific purpose. It is not designed for visitors. The pillars appear in chapter 18, verse 13, and they are the detail that most Western translations handle with the least precision. The Ge'ez word is not simply column or pillar in the architectural sense. The compound used in the Axum manuscript carries a secondary meaning that has to do with binding. Pillars of binding. Pillars that hold. The word is closer in its semantic range to anchoring posts than to decorative columns. Something is being held in place by them. The text is not describing architecture. It is describing restraint infrastructure. Enoch sees 7 of them. Chapter 18, verse 13 in the GS. 7 great pillars made from fire and ice together. Not alternating, not placed side by side. The compound suggests integration. Fire and ice combined into a single structural material that by any standard physics should not be possible. Enoch records this without comment. He does not try to resolve the contradiction. He records what he sees. The pillars are arranged in a configuration the text describes as surrounding. They form a perimeter around something. The enclosed space is implied by the description of what is held inside it. What is between the pillars is described in chapter 18, verse 14. Enoch writes that he saw stars there. Not stars in the sense of celestial objects visible at night. The Ge'ez makes this distinction. The word used is the word for the stars as beings, as entities, as the class of created things that existed before the current order. And the stars are not moving, they are bound. Chapter 18 uses the same root word for restraint that appears in legal texts of the same period when describing a prisoner awaiting judgment. They are held between the pillars the way a prisoner is held in a cell. The pillars are the walls of the cell. Chapter 21 arrives, and Enoch asks the angel Uriel why the stars are bound. Uriel's answer in the Ge'ez: These are the stars that transgressed the commandment of God before their rising. They did not come out at their appointed time. For that refusal, they are chained between 7 pillars of combined fire and ice in a sealed structure on a dark stone floor, in a location Enoch could only reach under angelic escort. This is the first layer. This is what is directly behind the ice wall. Before we move on to the chains themselves, stop for a second. What you just heard about, what Enoch identified past the first pillar, is the part that changes everything. But it only makes sense when you see it written out next to the full GES account. The beings named, the depth recorded. It's all in the document linked below. Take 5 seconds right now, grab it, and then come back. Because what comes next builds directly on it. The link is in the description. QR code is on your screen. Chapter 21 of the Book of Enoch does not immediately follow from Chapter 18 in most Western editions. The translation choices of R. H. Charles arranged the text to soften what comes next. In the GES manuscript at Axum, the progression is more direct. Enoch is taken beyond the first prison, the one with the ice wall and the 7 pillars, and brought to a place the text describes as more terrible than the first. The phrase in the GES is something like a place of greater darkness and greater restraint. Enoch uses a comparative. He has seen darkness before. This is darker. He has seen restraint before. This is more severe. He is being shown a hierarchy of containment. In chapter 21, verse 3, Enoch sees what he later asks the angel to explain. He sees 7 great entities described in the text using the same classificatory prefix used in all other Sumerian and early Jewish texts for beings of divine or semi-divine status. Not objects, not forces, not phenomena, beings. The grammar is clear about this. They have agency, they have form, they are burning, and they are bound. The angel identifies them in chapter 21, verse 6. These are the stars, he says. And in the GES, this is the same word used in chapter 18. But then he adds something that the standard English editions omit entirely. The J's text in the Axum manuscript continues past where Charles's translation stops. The full verse, according to Dr. Ephraim Isaac's notes, describes the beings as those who taught the upper things to the lower ones. This phrase does not appear in Charles. It does not appear in the Nib translation. It appears in the GES, and it appears in Isaac's archived notes and nowhere else in the published Western tradition. Those who taught the upper things to the lower ones. The upper things in Enoch's cosmological vocabulary refers to the knowledge that belongs to the upper realm, the knowledge of how the sky is structured, how the celestial cycles work, how the binding forces of the cosmos operate. The lower ones are humans. These beings taught the architecture of the cosmos to human beings, and for this they are here, bound between pillars in a place more terrible than the first prison, deeper and darker and under heavier restraint. This is the detail the Council of Laodicea was concerned about, not the existence of fallen angels. Every tradition in late antiquity accepted the existence of fallen angels. The specific concern was the claim that the knowledge possessed by these beings, the knowledge of how the cosmos is structured, had been transmitted to humanity before the beings were imprisoned. If that knowledge was transmitted and preserved, it could in principle be found again. A text that describes what was transmitted and names the beings who transmitted it and locates them in a specific place at a specific depth is not a spiritual comfort text. It is a reference document. The beings in chapter 21 are not the same beings as in chapter 18. The chapter 18 entities disobeyed a timing instruction. They refused to ascend to their assigned positions in the sky. The chapter 21 beings did something more active. They moved downward. They came to the lower realm and made contact with it and gave it knowledge it was not supposed to have. 2 different crimes, 2 different prisons, both described in physical terms, both given coordinates in the form of depth measurements, both still occupied at the time Enoch visits them. The Council of Laodicea met in 364 CE and produced a list of canonical books. Enoch was not on the list. The Council's records from this meeting survive in several manuscript traditions. Most scholarship focuses on the list of approved books. The reasons given for excluding specific texts receive less attention. Canon 60 of the Laodicean Council deals with texts touching on angelic beings and their places of punishment. The language of Canon 60 prohibits texts that name the angels held in punishment and describe the places of their binding. The Church's position was that angelic punishment was a spiritual reality mediated through the divine will, not a geographical fact with a location and a depth and a set of observable features. Enoch insisted on the geography. The Council insisted on the allegory. Enoch lost. Jerome, compiling the Latin Vulgate around 400 CE, addressed Enoch directly in his preface to the Book of Jude. Jude contains a quotation from Enoch, which made Enoch impossible to ignore entirely. Jerome's response was to allow the quotation, while dismissing the source. He writes that Enoch makes claims about the imprisonment of angels in places accessible by measurement. Jerome does not dispute that angels were imprisoned. He disputes the accessibility by measurement. He disputes the coordinates. Augustine, writing in the City of God around 410 CE, takes the same position from a different angle. He argues that the places of angelic punishment exist outside creation, not within it. If the prisons are outside creation, they cannot be located. They cannot be searched for. Enoch places them inside creation at a depth. Augustine places them outside creation entirely. One of them has to be wrong. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church did not attend the Council of Laodicea. It was operating under its own authority in a tradition that stretched back to a period when Enoch was still canonical, still treated as a first-person account rather than a symbolic text. When James Bruce brought 3 Giez manuscripts of Enoch to Europe in 1773, the reaction among Western scholars was not relief that a lost text had been recovered. The reaction, as documented in the correspondence of the period, was closer to alarm. R. H. Charles, in 1906, was more systematic about the problem. He produced a translation that is still used as the standard English reference. In his editorial notes to Chapter 18, he states that the geographical material in this chapter is the most difficult section in the entire text to interpret because it does not correspond to any known cosmological scheme. His solution was to treat it as Enoch borrowing from multiple cosmological traditions and combining them imprecisely. This explanation does not account for the internal consistency of the description. A borrowing from multiple inconsistent traditions does not produce a consistent location with consistent materials and a consistent depth and a consistent set of observable features. Enoch's chapter 18 produces exactly that. The removal of Enoch from the canon in 364 did not destroy the text. The Axum manuscripts survived. The Dead Sea Scrolls fragments, 11 separate copies of Enoch, found at Qumran in 1947, survived. More copies of Enoch were found at Qumran than most books that remained in the biblical canon. Whatever the council intended to accomplish by removing the text, it did not accomplish the disappearance of the text. What it accomplished was the disappearance of the habit of reading it as a first-person account of an observed location. In 2020, a team at the Japan Agency for Marine Earth Science and Technology drilled sediment cores from the floor of the South Pacific Gyre, one of the most remote and lifeless regions of the deep ocean. The cores came back with something alive inside them. Microbial cells, dormant, sealed under more than 200 feet of sediment in rock layers over 100 million years old. The cells were still metabolically active, still consuming oxygen, at a rate so slow that one breath, by their measurement, takes 10,000 years. The lead researcher, Dr. Yuki Morono, described the organisms as existing in a state with no scientific category, not alive in any ordinary sense, not dead, waiting, sealed beneath the ocean floor, in sediment that formed before the age of the dinosaurs, metabolizing in a timescale that makes a human lifespan look like an afternoon. Enoch describes being sealed in a location beneath the visible world that breathe, that are burning but not consumed, that are bound in a permanent condition that has no scheduled end. The Giez in chapter 19 uses a phrase for the duration of their imprisonment that appears elsewhere in the text only in contexts describing permanent states, not a temporary hold, permanent containment. For a being with an indefinite lifespan, permanent containment and the slow metabolic state Morono's team found in the sediment are describing the same kind of existence from two different directions. In 2023, a team at the University of Tokyo published research in Nature Geoscience, describing anomalous seismic readings at the core mantle boundary, roughly 1,800 miles beneath the surface of the Earth. The readings identified what the paper calls ultra-low velocity zones, regions where seismic waves slow dramatically, indicating a material composition different from the surrounding mantle. The zones are geometrically regular. They are arranged in patterns that do not match natural geological formation. The lead researcher described them as behaving like boundaries around discrete volumes, not gradual transitions. Enoch describes discrete compartments. Chapter 22 divides the space below into 4 separate hollow places, separated from each other. Chapter 21 describes a prison deeper than the 4 hollow places. Chapter 18 describes a prison separated from Chapter 21's location by the ice wall and the pillar room. Each level is separate. Each level is bounded. The seismic data shows separate bounded zones at extreme depth. This is not a claim that the seismic anomalies are what Enoch describes. The seismic data is physical. Enoch's text is a first-person account from 2,000 years ago. The point is more precise than that. The point is that the structural description in Enoch, the discrete bounded zones at depth, the separation of levels, the organized compartmentalization, matches what modern geophysics actually finds. A person writing a symbolic text about the afterlife in 200 BCE has no reason to describe the deep mantle as a series of bounded discrete zones separated from each other. That is not how symbolic afterlife literature works. That is how a field report describes an observed organizational structure. There are three positions a person can take toward what Enoch describes in chapter 18 and 21. The first is that the text is symbolic. The ice wall is not ice. The pillars are not pillars. The chained entities are metaphors for abstract spiritual realities that the ancient author dressed in concrete language, because concrete language is how ancient authors communicated abstract truths. This reading requires explaining why the author was consistent enough in his material descriptions to produce a coherent location, but loose enough in his intentions to mean nothing physical by it. The third reading is the one most scholars decline to state directly, while also declining to rule out. Enoch went where he says he went. He saw what he says he saw. The beings between the pillars are what the text says they are. The chains are real. The depth is real. The ice wall with the door that has no outside handle is real. And the location is still there, below whatever boundary separates the surface of the world from what is beneath it. What the text does not do is tell you which reading is correct. What it does instead is provide enough specific detail that the question of which reading is correct is not a theological question. It is a question that could in principle be checked. The council that removed this text from the canon in 364 CE understood exactly that. They said so in their records. The problem with Enoch's chapter 18 was that it described places accessible by measurement. The pillars are still in the text, exactly where Enoch left them. The chains are still described. The entities chained between them are still named. The door without a handle on the outside is still sealed from the inside. Whatever is held there, Enoch saw it and wrote it down, and the text survived all the church did to prevent it mattering.